That's how we all die.
The damage that Murdoch's power and his newspapers have done is almost incalculable. So there were really significant political decisions. For example, the invasion of Iraq. For example, the question of whether or not we should have gone into the euro, where Murdoch has had a defining influence. And beyond that, look at the political culture. Look at how his newspapers have converted into dirty words terms like liberal, or migrant, or trade union, or Europe. They've actually changed the way that political debate takes place. And if you don't approve of that, then it's reasonable to say the damage that's been done by that man and his newspapers is just about incalculable. And that's why it's worth writing about. That's why the story may start with crime in a newsroom, but it goes way beyond that. It goes to the heart of what claims to be a democratic society.
It was the black and white broadsheet turned red-top tabloid which put the screws into news. It had undercover stings and a fake sheikh who was the real deal. Many condemned its style, but few dared ignore its influence. But then came its sensational demise, engulfed in a scandal all of its own, forged in the hacked voicemails of an abducted teenager and fueled by the outrage which followed. It left the police humiliated, politicians tainted, and the news of the world, 168 years in the making, gone in a day.
It was a nothing story, a tabloid tale involving a member of the British royal family, but its publication in late 2005 and the suspicion that the reporter got the story by hacking into voicemail messages on the subject's mobile phone started an investigation that by 2011 laid bare a political scandal that reached into multiple British institutions and painted a picture of a news organization so powerful that those institutions, including Parliament, police, and the rest of the British news media, dared not take it on. The de facto investigation wasn't even conducted by the London Metropolitan Police Force. It was primarily the work of a newspaper, The Guardian, and, for the most part, one reporter, Nick Davis. Davis has just published a book on the story, Hack Attack: How the Truth Caught Up with Rupert Murdoch. What starts as a probe into the criminal culture at British tabloids owned by Murdoch's News Corporation ultimately lifts the veil on the shadowy end of government, the cozy relationship between successive prime ministers at 10 Downing Street and a media baron skilled at acquiring assets, wealth, and political power. I sat down with Nick Davis in London to discuss the story, the power of fear, and the future of the Murdoch media empire, which lies disgraced, but by no means defeated. Nick Davis, thanks for joining us here at the Listening Post today.
Okay.
In your epilogue, you write that we need to shake ourselves free of this illusion that because we won a really important battle, we won a war, that by exposing some secret machinations, we stop the machinations occurring. In truth, very little has changed. Since when have journalists on book tours been so modest about their accomplishments?
No, that's actually the reality about being a writer or a journalist, is that you have this fantasy that if you write about a bad thing, the bad thing will stop. Whereas actually what happens, and this is a classic example, the phone hacking scandal, you write about the bad thing, the people who are responsible get extremely angry and do a lot of running around shouting, and then they carry on. So in this particular case, we've probably stopped the hacking of phones. I would think that criminal activity in British national newspaper offices has fallen from rather a high level to zero. But that's about all we've achieved. So I just didn't want people to kid themselves that we'd actually changed what's really important about the story, which is about Rupert Murdoch's abuse of power, his political power, his ability to frighten the police, his ability to frighten all sorts of people in the power elite. So we might have stopped a bit of crime going on in newspapers, but that's it.
I've said to people that I think this is the biggest scandal, political scandal in modern British history. The thing about this one was that it reached into so many of these British institutions.
Exactly.
It was so pervasive.
Yeah.
So do you see it the same way as I do?
It's a quite extraordinary story from very, very small origins, precisely as you say. It reaches into so many different parts. And what that reflects is the way in which Rupert Murdoch's power reaches into so many different parts. So as soon as you start looking at the crime, then you say, well, how come they got away with that crime? So in a small way, you look at the press regulator, so they did nothing about it. Then you look at the police, they did nothing about it. And then the next thing is you look into the most important area, which is government. A long history of our elected governments, these supposedly democratic governments, allowing Rupert Murdoch and his network to influence them in a way that ordinary voters have no chance of exercising that kind of an influence. And you take that lovely little idea we came up with once upon a time about one man or woman, one vote, this government works for us, and you put it in the waste bin, because the media mogul has come in, he's the guy with the influence.
That influence starts with the newspapers Rupert Murdoch controls, Britain's biggest daily tabloid, its best-selling weekly tabloid, plus the Times and the Sunday.
Rupert Murdoch owns over half of Australia's newspapers, including our only national broadsheet, all the major tabloids, pretty much everywhere except Perth, heaps of local and regional mastheads, and one of the most popular news websites.
The Prime Minister squeezed in a dinner date with Rupert Murdoch.
Julia Gillard talked to business leaders, including Rupert Murdoch.
Malcolm Turnbull also courted Murdoch.
Australia's most powerful politician and its most influential newspaper owner dined for 2 hours without advisors.
Psst, Rupert, I'm not wearing any advisors. It all means Australia now has some of the most concentrated media ownership in the world. Murdoch controls pay TV and most of the metro papers. Kerry Stokes owns Channel 7 and the Western Australian papers. And Nine Entertainment owns Channel 9, 3 major papers and a bunch of radio. When fewer people own the media, the louder their voices get, and the less politicians listen to regular people at the breakfast table. Don't just take my word for it. Just ask this young up-and-comer back in 1967, doing his own relatable chinwag in his kitchen.
I think the important thing is that there'll be plenty of newspapers with plenty of different people controlling them, so that there's a variety of viewpoint, that there's a choice for the public. There must be an alternative. And so long as there are alternatives, then I think that the public's very well protected.
Well said. If only that young man owned a newspaper.
Britain's phone hacking scandal has claimed 2 more high-profile scalps. London's Metropolitan Police Chief has resigned, and former News International Chief Executive Rebekah Brooks has been arrested by police. 10's Europe correspondent Brett Mason is following developments in London.
Ron, anything but a quiet Sunday here in the United Kingdom. Well, the former CEO of this country's most powerful media organisation was being arrested on one side of London. The police commissioner was resigning on the other. Type the phrase Rebekah Brooks arrested into Google and you will find 6.6 million websites carrying this story. Such is the significance of the phone hacking scandal. Yet another celebrity has come forward, this time David Beckham. His lawyers will talk to Scotland Yard and find out if his name is on a list of 4,000 suspected phone hack victims. If it is, he is expected to take legal action. Yet more bad news for the Murdoch family, which is yet again fighting for its reputation.
You could make the mistake of thinking that the phone hacking scandal is about phone hacking. It isn't. That's just the beginning of the thing. This was always, obviously, a story about power. You have this former Australian with an American passport who owns 4 national newspapers and a national news channel. And he has access to politicians of a kind ordinary people can't dream of, and he has power to influence what that government decides to do. These are selfish, ruthless people. I don't think they worried too much. It's kind of scary, bearing in mind the myths we tell about ourselves, that we live in this democratic society. The power of a bully in a school playground, and once this bully has beaten up 2 or 3 kids and made pulp out of them, the other kids get the message and they set out to placate the bully. It's about fear. Do you listen to Bob Dylan? You know, he had ages ago, mid-60s, had this song about even the President of the United States sometimes must have to stand naked. But I use that at the end of the story. Even the President of News Corp sometimes may have to stand naked.
That is the first I've heard of that.
The truth is, and probably the uncomfortable truth in this building, is that everyone's frightened of Murdoch. They really are. There's a culture of fear across the country. And the fear is rationally based. They've seen many cases of individual political leaders and others who have had their characters assassinated through a systematic campaign by the Murdoch media. In other words, what the Murdoch mob are after is compliant politicians who won't rock the boat. In fact, even better if they provide them with taxpayer dollars to assist them on the way through. As Prime Minister, I was still fearful of the Murdoch media beast. That's just the truth of it. I could pretend that I wasn't, but I was. I've spoken with Malcolm Turnbull about this a lot in recent times. Malcolm, in his period as Prime Minister, was fearful of the Murdoch media beast in terms of what it could do to us.
What I want to speak to is the way in which one media organisation in Australia, the News Corp, that belonging to Rupert Murdoch and his family, has profoundly changed in the way it works on our democracy. I grew up with newspapers that some of them leant more to the left than to the right, or more to the right than the left, but they, by and large, reported the news as it happened. They had opinion writers that were, you know, across the spectrum, some leaning more one way than the other. That has all changed. News Corp now is like a political party, but with just one member or one family of members. And that is an absolute threat to our democracy. And the Americans saw it on the 6th of January, and nobody is holding them to account. Now, Rudyard Kipling once described the power of the press barons as exercising the prerogative of the harlot, power without responsibility. A bit tough on harlots, I would think. But the reality is that power has to be held accountable. You know, this is the fundamental problem that we're facing. The most powerful political actor in Australia is not the Liberal Party or the National Party or the Labor Party. It is News Corporation, and it's utterly unaccountable. It's controlled by an American family, and their interests are no longer, if they ever were, coextensive with our own.
1. High Court hearing. 3. Former managing editors. 8. Former news executives. 12. Senior Sun staff members suspected of phone hacking and blagging. 20 years of allegations. 49 claimants suing the Sun over phone hacking and use of illegal data gathering. How many more victims? How many more crimes?
By the name of John Christopher Depp, 51 years old, otherwise aka Jack Sparrow, and he has decided to bring into our nation 2 dogs without actually getting the proper certification and the proper permits required. Basically looks like he snuck them in. We found out he snuck them in because we saw them taking it to a poodle groomer. Now, Mr Depp has to either take his dogs back to California or we're going to have to euthanize them. He's now got about 50 hours left to remove the dogs.
The actress is facing 2 counts over illegally importing her and Johnny Depp's pups, 2 Yorkshire Terriers, into the country. She is also charged with producing a false document.
I am truly sorry that Pistol and Boo were not declared. Protecting Australia is important.
Here it appeared in an apology video with her actor husband Johnny Depp, which was played at an Australian courthouse on Monday as part of her court appearance. The charge carries a maximum penalty of a year in jail and a fine of almost $8,000 US, but the judge sentenced her instead to a 1-month good behavior bond.
I can confirm the department is investigating that matter. So there was evidence presented in the London court case which suggested false statements were provided in the court case in Australia in 2016. So we are investigating that.
So what's the timeline you expect that investigation and decision made about?
As I understand it, the former state manager of Johnny Depp, Kevin Murphy, said in a witness statement that he told, quote, by email, telephone and in person that she could not take the dogs to Australia because the relevant paperwork and permits were not complete and the required 10-day quarantine arrangements had not been put in place. Murphy continued, Ms. later told the court in Australia that I had told her it was fine to bring the dogs into Australia. That is false. I never told her this.
Yes, so Senator, we understand that to be the case, or the evidence provided in the London court case, and giving a false testimony is an offence under the Crimes Act, so that is what we are now investigating.
Well, now, in a new, just incredible twist, actress Amber Heard seems determined to have the last laugh with a taunt to Barnaby Joyce, who threatened to have her pets put down.
Barnaby Joyce Heard, don't you scratch that glass one more time. I will hurt you.
The Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, joins us now. We've been waiting for this interview all morning. Barnaby, what is your reaction to this? What an honour.
It's, I can't work it out. I'd forgotten about her. She was out of my mind. But I'm in her mind. I'm in there like a bee. I'm just buzzing around her brain, making bee words. Barnaby, now she's naming a dog after me. She'll name a horse after me. I don't know, I think it's kind of crazy. That's what I think. It's kind of crazy. Mind you, there's still the question about perjury for her and Johnny. There's still a big question about that. They've got some questions to answer. But what I love is Barnaby Joyce, as if there's another Barnaby who is in her ear. Maybe she named it after St Barnabas the Apostle, or I don't know, Barnaby Rudge from Dickens. But I think she just had to say Barnaby. But, Barnaby, that's IQ, isn't it?
Some well-known people in Britain delivered pretty damning testimony in London today, all week in fact, at an inquiry into the ethics of the British media. It was prompted by the phone hacking scandal at the News of the World tabloid. The CBC's Susan Ormiston listened to the testimony today. Susan.
Peter, the media's on trial here at the Royal Courts, with testimony today from stars like Sienna Miller and J.K. Rowling. A parade of personalities who depend on celebrity took their turn as witnesses.
I was relentlessly pursued by about 10 to 15 men. Anything from being spat at or verbally abused. I think that the incentive is really to get as strong a reaction as possible. High on a hill.
Writer J.K. Rowling said she found a note from a reporter in her 5-year-old's school bag.
The attitude seems to be utterly cavalier. Indifference. What does it matter? You're famous. You're asking for it. I feel the PCC is toothless. That it offers very little in the way of sanctions to newspapers, that it's a wrist-slapping exercise at best. I do feel that we need a body that has teeth, that can impose sanctions.
Earlier this year, Rupert Murdoch's News of the World tabloid shut down. More than a dozen of its reporters and editors were arrested. 2 senior London police officers were fired because of links to the paper. The British Prime Minister's press secretary resigned for similar reasons. And just yesterday, Rupert Murdoch's son, James, quit the boards of 3 British newspapers.
going to break this down for all of you because I know that some of our viewers have already written in, like, what's going on with J.K. Rowling? Why is she being canceled? Why is this hashtag trending? And I'm going to have to simplify it for time's sake. So there's two huge sides to this, right? Very polarizing. You have one side that is defending J.K. Rowling, saying she's an author, she's a creative, she should be able to create her villains in her books any way that she sees fit without people assuming that she's painting an entire community with a broad brush and people shouldn't be labeling her nor canceling her. Then you have another side saying, well, you take her, first of all, the book no one's read, I should just say. Unless you're a critic, the book comes out today.
It's not out yet.
Yes, so all the people on social media with an opinion right now, they're going off the headlines, okay? So then you have this other side that is saying, okay, pointing to the fact that she's made transphobic comments in the past, and they're afraid that her book, the way that she describes this villain, is going to perpetuate transphobic behavior and negative thoughts in regard to, and negative stereotypes rather, in regard to trans people in the trans community. Now,
like to give us a short opening statement and then we can go to some questions.
If I could, thanks so much.
Thank you.
In the 20 years that I've been a photographer for News Corp, I've worked on the national, the state, the regional and the community mastheads. I was one of 5 women in a team of 30 photographers at the headquarters in Sydney in the 90s, where we used film and hand-printed photos in the darkroom. In 1995, I was transferred to the Cairns Bureau and worked throughout Cape York, hand-processing film and sending photos remotely. Technology's changed so much that in 2020, I live-streamed the Prime Minister using only my mobile phone. The issues that I'd like to address today are the portrayal and the treatment of women by News Corp and the toxic work culture that's a result of the lack of media diversity. When I was employed by the Sunday Mail in 2011 to do social photos, I was told by the acting picture editor that they did not want any photos of, quote, pigs in lipstick. I found this was extremely derogatory to women, but to keep my job, I had to apply this test, which meant that women who were overweight or over 35 did not get a run in the paper. When I was employed at the Cairns Post, I was encouraged to take photos of attractive women with instructions like, get a photo of a yummy mummy, or get a photo of a pretty backpacker. I was never, ever directed to get a photo of an attractive man. I was told that the photo of an attractive woman would get a better run in the paper. I felt uncomfortable doing this, as I thought it was sexist. Even the selection of which court stories to cover is now based on applying the subscriber page view model at News Corp. Former colleagues have told me that they are told to ignore the charges and instead look out for attractive women appearing in court. They check their social media following and lift their photos off Facebook. If the women are attractive and have more than 1,000 followers, then it is much more likely that they will run the story online as it'll get more page views.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And that's one grovelling apology from Sky News commentator and Herald Sun columnist Andrew Bolt, who's made a career out of not saying sorry. So what exactly did Bolt say that forced him to break the habit of a lifetime? Well, 48 hours earlier, he was rubbishing last week's Four Corners story on sex abuse at an elite Melbourne Catholic school and attacking ABC reporter Louise Milligan.
That headmaster that she mentioned, who gave a character reference for a man who was an ex-teacher who hit on a boy at that school. No sex occurred, hit on the boy, later jailed for grooming. A ex-teacher is a volunteer coach. He gets a St Kevin's boy, hits on him, no sex involved, but is convicted of grooming.
Yes, hit on the boy, no sex involved, nothing to see here, even though he was found guilty.
10 a.m. today, the High Court unanimously quashed the conviction for child sex crimes of Cardinal George Pell. To some, Pell will always be guilty regardless of the High Court's judgment because all priests are suspect and every complainant must be believed. To others, of course, the Cardinal could never have been guilty because these awful crimes are so out of character with the man they knew.
Talking about people who should apologise for abusing the few of us who dared say George Pell, we think is innocent. Ray Hadley, 2GB guy. In February, here's what he said about me.
Mr Bolt has a history of defending people who are convicted of paedophilia. He has a history of it. even when appeals are denied. He has a history of it. Now that's on his conscience, not mine.
You may remember that before this lawsuit with Amber, Johnny had already fought for a lawsuit against the news publisher The Sun after the company called him a very bad name. He lost the case, for those of you wondering, and that cost him his precious role in the Fantastic Beasts film series. So, pulling that card was really quite expected, but very bad move from Amber. As for Johnny Depp's lawyer, he was calling it a Hail Mary. Amber's team believed that due to the libel case results, which were found in favor of The Sun, that the judgment rendered should be applicable in the U.S. as well. However, Johnny Depp's lawyer said that this isn't the first time Amber Heard's legal team has tried to get the $50 million lawsuit dismissed, and instead, he noted that they tried to get the case thrown out 3 times over the past 2 years. And after that, she then surprised the whole world with her own baby. It was born out of a surrogate, and yes, no one knows who the father is, but it may actually be an important twist in the hearings to come. But just as you thought that Amber may finally be tired of surprises, well, here comes another one. Amber Heard might be thinking 3rd time's the charm when her legal team tried to dismiss her case again. For the 3rd time. Wow, being inside Amber Heard's head might be tough.
So in today's video, I want to talk a little bit more about that awesome order handed down by Judge Penny denying Amber Heard's dismissal plea. So it goes on to say, given the differences between Virginia and UK law regarding trials by jury and libel laws, the court is hesitant to apply preclusive effect to the UK finding, especially considering defendant was not a party in the UK suit and was not subject to the same discovery requirements in that suit. Thus, even under the factors of Hilton, some previous case, the substantive and procedural differences between this case and the UK case do not warrant granting of committee. Love it. Absolutely love it. And she's giving Amber Heard and, of course, Elaine, Amber's lawyer, a huge schooling on the law here. Alright, and it goes on to say next, defendant is correct in her assertion that this court should enforce the UK court's judgment precluding plaintiff from recovering against the Sun for libel, but plaintiff has not brought suit against the Sun in this case. Instead, plaintiff brought forth a different suit with a different defendant based on different statements. It seems as though dopey Dan Wooten and ambitious Amber Heard may have gotten together, conspired to have Johnny Depp removed from Fantastic Beasts through a conversation or conversations with J.K. Rowling. Now, this is all predicated on the assumption that what Dan Wooten wrote here is actually true. Now, how much do I trust Dan Wooten? Let's just say, what's less than not at all? Because Dan Wooten is a weaselly, slimy piece of disingenuous doo-doo. And so I do not trust Dan Wooten as far as I could throw him. But let's talk about this as if it were true, what he has said in this article. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so the article is titled, Dan Wooten, J.K. Rowling has a spectacular list of achievements to her name, but her courage in defying the cancer mob is her crowning glory. Now, most of this article is just Wooten waffle, and it really means nothing because Dan Wooten is, as I said, a very disingenuous person, and to call him a journalist, well, that's a massive, massive stretch. But what he has mentioned at the beginning of this article is related to Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, so we are going to touch on that. And like I said before, if we are to assume that what he said here is true, then the implications could be very, very dire for one Amber Heard and the Virginia trial. So let's get into it. It says, let me start by emphatically stating that J.K. Rowling and I have never been friends or even allies. Really? Well, that's obvious. I haven't read a word of Harry Potter, and a column I wrote in 2018 criticizing her for being a Hollywood hypocrite over the hashtag MeToo movement resulted in my lengthy court battle with Johnny Depp. Hang on, he said my court battle? I don't remember seeing you in the courtroom, Mr. Weakling Wooten. I didn't see you there standing up and saying where you got all this overwhelming evidence from, or producing it. Anyways, I continue. The column, headlined by my former newspaper on its website as Gone Potty, how can J.K. Rowling be genuinely happy to cast wife puppet Johnny Depp in film? posed a number of questions to the Potter creator, including, you admitted last year there were legitimate questions about Depp's casting. What were these and how did you overcome them? In fact, at one point, Rowling even threatened to sue me. Interesting. She seemed mad that I had suggested recasting Depp in the movies was the only decision that would show she's a woman of true character and principle, even when her famous friends are involved. Now, I mean, there's a whole lot of things to discuss here, because why would that make her anything? She doesn't have to do anything on behalf of anybody else. She doesn't have to do a single damn thing, Mr. Wooten. And what makes you the judge of character? I mean, really? You didn't even have the stones to stand up in court and defend yourself, even though the UK court case was against NGN newspapers and Dan Wooten. Anyways, I continue. So it goes on. But I held my nerve. Oh yeah, you held your nerve, Dan. Yeah, so strong. Aware the facts were on my side, and the very rich Scottish author eventually relented with a few tough words from her overpaid lawyer thrown my way. Depp didn't relent, as you may remember, losing the court case after his ex-wife Amber Heard agreed to give evidence for me. Yeah, so you really held your nerve there, didn't you, Dan? Really held your nerve, getting Amber Heard to give evidence for you. Anyway, documenting his appalling record of a physical you-know-what and mental you-know-what. But, interesting. This part is the most interesting. Both Amber and I offered to meet with Rowling separately to explain what we knew about Depp's behaviour, but she rebuffed our attempts to reach out. Now, why would she do that, Dan? I wonder. Like you said, you've never been friends or allies, and you've criticised her publicly multiple times. So that all stands to reason. But if we are to assume that Dan Weakling Wooten is actually telling the truth when he says that both him and Amber approached J.K. Rowling to have Depp removed from Fantastic Beasts, then that has huge implications for Amber Heard in the Virginia trial in the US, where she's being directly sued by Johnny Depp, because that would then prove defamation, because she's trying to actively get him out of work, get him kicked out of a film, based on all of these false allegations that she's made. And so Dan Wooten, if this is true, he's essentially thrown Amber under the bus. And
here's a story of a former Aussie who liked leaders to be listening to his views. He owned outlets round the world, watched by millions. He also owned Sky News, choosing leaders for his readers and deciding which prime ministers to dump. He hacked the phones of missing girls and pushed for Brexit and gave us Donald Trump. His son James, he took the blame as the pie man took the blows from Wendy Deng. Lachlan went back home to Australia and fucked up Channel 10. Then old Rupert got a spinal hematoma on his way to take a leak on Lachlan's yacht. The family, they all gathered round his deathbed to see who'd got the lot. But he recovered and the brothers were divided, so Rupert played them off to see who'd win the house. Then he sold off half the farm for 70 billion. He sold it to a mouse. Now poor James is on the outer dump for Lachlan, who's more right-wing than his father, so we'll see who will die first, Rupert Murdoch or democracy. The Murdoch bunch, a bunch of Murdochs, that's the way they behave. The Murdoch bunch.